Historical Secular Pacifist Movements, Section 6. Welcome back, everyone. So far, we've traced pacifism through its religious roots, philosophical foundations, and its central themes of nonviolence, moral conviction, civil disobedience, and activism. Today, we shift our focus to the secular history of pacifism, that is, pacifist movements that were not exclusively religious, but were often political, social, and philosophical responses to the violence of the 20th century. The story here takes us through World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and into contemporary times. In each era, secular pacifists confronted the most destructive forces of modern history and sought alternatives. World War I, pacifism against the current. The First World War, 1914-1918, marked the beginning of what some historians call the short 20th century, a period of global conflict and upheaval. At a time when nationalism and militarism dominated, pacifists stood out as dissenters. They included socialists, who argued that workers had no interest in killing one another for imperial powers; anarchists, who rejected all state authority and violence as illegitimate; feminists, who linked the violence of war to patriarchy and domination; intellectuals and artists, who challenged the glorification of war in literature and politics. These pacifists were often ridiculed, imprisoned, or censored, yet their refusal to accept war as inevitable planted seeds for later peace movements. World War II. Conscientious objection in dark times. The Second World War, 1939-1945, presented an even greater test for pacifism. With the rise of fascism, the Holocaust, and totalitarian aggression, many critics claimed that pacifism was naive or even dangerous. And yet, pacifism did not disappear. Quakers and Mennonites, though rooted in religion, inspired broader secular objection. Many chose prison or alternative service rather than enlist. Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement embodied radical nonviolence, rejecting both fascism and militarism. Bayard Rustin, an African-American activist later central to the civil rights movement, was jailed for refusing military service. Jeannette, Rankin, the first woman elected to the U.S. Congress, famously voted against entering both world wars, standing virtually alone in her dissent. These examples show us that even in what many saw as a just war, pacifist witness endured, though often at great personal cost. Post-World War II, Nuclear Disarmament, and the Cold War. After 1945, the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the landscape of pacifism forever. The threat of nuclear annihilation created a new urgency for secular peace movements. In Britain, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND, organized mass marches and protests in the 1950s and 60s. Their symbol, the peace sign, remains iconic today. In the United States, groups like the War Resisters League and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, opposed both racial injustice and the Vietnam War. International networks like ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, grew in influence, linking disarmament to global security and humanitarian law. For many, nuclear disarmament became the ultimate pacifist cause. If war meant mutual annihilation, then peace was the only rational option. Vietnam War and protest movements. The Vietnam War, 1955-1975, brought pacifism into mainstream culture in unprecedented ways. Pacifist ideas merged with the counterculture, students, musicians, and intellectuals protesting the war. Draft resistance and conscientious objection became widespread. Nonviolent civil disobedience, inspired by King and Gandhi, was adopted in sit-ins, marches, and teach-ins. Veterans themselves, through groups like Vietnam Veterans Against the War, joined the pacifist movement, lending it moral authority. The Vietnam era revealed how pacifism could galvanize not just religious minorities, but broad sectors of society. Contemporary pacifism, human rights, and climate activism. In more recent decades, secular pacifism has continued to evolve. Human rights movements, pacifist strategies underpin campaigns against apartheid, dictatorships, and systemic injustice. Nonviolent revolutions in Eastern Europe, 1989, the Arab Spring, 2011, and elsewhere have drawn directly from pacifist traditions. Climate and eco-pacifism. Activists connect environmental destruction to patterns of violence and exploitation. Groups like Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, and eco-justice networks practice civil disobedience on behalf of the earth. Global peace building. Secular NGOs mediate conflicts, support post-war reconciliation, and advocate for refugees and disarmament. Here we see pacifism broadening its scope, no longer only opposing war, but addressing all forms of structural violence, including environmental harm and systemic inequality. Closing reflections. So, what do we learn from these secular pacifist movements? Pacifism has persisted in every era, even in times when it was unpopular or dangerous. It adapts to new challenges, from opposing world wars to resisting nuclear weapons to fighting for civil rights to addressing climate change. Pacifism is not only religious, it is also political, cultural, and practical. It speaks to workers, students, artists, and activists who believe that violence is not the answer. As we move to our final section, Section 7, we will examine the critiques of pacifism and the responses pacifists give. This will help us engage honestly with the hardest questions. Does pacifism really work? Can it stand against tyranny? Or is it, as critics argue, too idealistic for a violent world?